You're 30, a bearded guy from a Norwegian fjord, and you are a farmer, not a warrior in a horned helmet. Viking isn't a job, it's a summer gig. It's 850, you're Thorvald, and 3 months a year you help terrify half of Europe. A raider's cut sounds rich, but wait till the jarl opens the deductions. Stay to the end and tell me, better than your paycheck or worse? Dawn breaks over the fjord, and there are no monasteries to loot. There are animals to feed, cows, sheep, pigs, and barley to sow, because barley becomes bread, porridge, and beer. Most of the year you dig dirt and mend fences. You eat twice a day, morning and evening. No lunch. Lunch hasn't been invented yet. You go home to a longhouse. One room, 30 meters long, a hearth down the middle, smoke in your eyes. Under one roof, family, farmhands, and livestock behind a partition. In winter, their body heat warms you. So does their smell. You sleep on a bench under firs. By our standards, a barn. By theirs, middle class. But this house isn't yours to run. It's your wife's. On her belt hangs a ring of keys, power over everything inside. The food, the stores, the silver. You sail away half the year, and she runs the whole farm alone. So, first audit question, who really holds this house? Not the guy with the axe, the woman with the keys. And those keys are backed by real law. A Scandinavian woman could own land, run a household, and get divorced. She wants out, she gathers witnesses, declares it, and half the property is hers. In 9th century Europe, where a wife had no rights, that's science fiction. So you're a fearsome raider abroad, and at home, you argue over the cow. And here's the first myth I'll kill, for once in your favor. This savage is a neat freak. Grave after grave turns up combs, tweezers, ear spoons, razors. On Saturdays you wash, and the Old Norse word for Saturday literally means bathing day. You're cleaner than the King of France. Your move, Hollywood. And it drove the English nuts. One monk filed a complaint that these Danes comb their hair daily, bathe every Saturday, dress well, and steal our women that way. You skip one shower before a meeting. Thorvald got reported to the authorities for being too clean. Different century, same office politics. But don't picture a spa. The Arab envoy, Ibn Fadlan, met the Rus and was horrified. One basin went around each morning. You wash your face, blow your nose, spit, and pass it to the next man. So you land in the middle, cleaner than a king, filthier than a diplomat. But the barley's sown now, and the window opens. Between sowing and harvest, you can finally go a Viking. A good raid can hand a rower silver worth a whole year's wage, $10,000 to $15,000 today. Pocket that number, you'll want it at the end. You grab your shield and walk to the ship. Problem is, going a Viking isn't cheap. Before we sail, let's do what we always do. Let's open the payslip. Gross, that year's wage in silver, the shining bag. Now the deductions. The gear, a full kit of chainmail, helmet, sword, and shield costs a small herd of cows, so most men raid in leather with just an axe. Then the jarl's cut, then the families of the dead. Take home, we count the scraps tonight. The movie's promised a shining night. The ledger says rower, in debt for his boots. But your gear was never the real weapon. The ship is. The Drakkar, the longship. Narrow, fast, shallow. It shoots up any river and slides onto the beach. Its fat cousin, the Nar, hauls cargo and slaves. The Drakkar buys speed and surprise. Your real weapon was never the axe. It's the boat. But that boat costs a whole village, hundreds of oaks, years of a carpenter's work, tons of iron rivets. Only a jarl can afford one. So, new era, new hope. Maybe this time the rower keeps his silver. Nope. He owns the ship. He takes the lion's share. You just row. Say it with me. There is always a middleman. So you row into open water. Gray swells taller than the rail. Oars bending, spray in your face. The dragon head cutting the storm. You whine about your commute. Thorvald rode a week into a storm just to get paid. And here's the part the sagas never brag about. More Vikings died at sea than in any battle. And you do it with no compass. You hug the coast and steer by the sun and the stars. In fog, maybe by a sunstone, a crystal said to catch light through clouds. Gorgeous story, but not one was ever found on a Viking ship. File it under historians still argue.
But survive the crossing, and the payoff waits. A rich, defenseless monastery on the coast. Inside, gold, silver, holy relics. Not one soldier. Back in 793, raiders just like you first landed on Lindisfarne, and a chronicler wrote that Britain had never known such terror. Today, you're one of them. So at dawn, you burst out of the fog onto the beach. The monks don't even understand what's happening. You grab the silver and the captives and leave before anyone reacts. An hour later, you're gone, and all that's left is smoke over a burning roof. So what did you grab? A Viking doesn't count his coins. He weighs them. The silver gets chopped up. Hacked bracelets, broken rings, sliced coins. That's why every trader carries a folding scale. You owe a man half, you chop a coin in half and hand it over. And here's the line that stops me. That silver came from the east. The Rus ran slaves and furs down the Volga to the Arabs and brought back silver dirhams. Swedish hoards hold tens of thousands, so a Norwegian farmer's pocket money was minted in Baghdad. Globalization, 9th century edition. So you sail home rich, and silver buys you a ladder. A plain sword costs 1 cow. Guess what a famous named blade runs? Wrong, higher. 16 cows. A whole herd for 1 sword. And how does everyone know you climbed? Your arm. Silver and gold arm rings are a wallet you never take off. The more you wear, the louder it says, "This man raids and comes back alive." But silver runs out fast, and your real enemy isn't the neighbor with an axe. It's winter. 6 months of dark, and whatever you didn't stockpile turns into hunger. If the barley rots or the cattle die, the family starves. So that ring of keys isn't decoration. She counts every strip of salted meat and grain till the thaw. Around half of all children never reached 5. The food is plain, but it carries you through the winter dark. Bread, porridge, fish, mutton, and skyr, a sour curd. You drink beer daily. Mead is saved for feasts. And a feast? Same menu, piled high, with stories told by the fire. And that's the feast in the longhouse. Fire down the middle, men and women in their best along the benches, drinking horns raised, painted shields on the walls catching the light. Nights like this are the whole reason you row home alive. And a night like this only happens if your name gets remembered. But almost nobody here can read. No books, so memory gets carved into stone. Runestones stood by the road. Thorvald raised this stone for his brother who fell in the west. Monument, obituary, and brag in one. So to be remembered in 1,000 years, you raid, win fame, and get your name cut into granite. And that hunger for a glorious name comes from what you believe. In Odin, Thor, and Freya, and in Valhalla, the Hall of the Fallen. Only one way in. Die in battle, weapon in hand. Dying old in bed was a disgrace. The 3 sister Norns already spun your fate, so what's left to fear? Your death is already booked. So when a chief dies, they don't mourn quietly. They send him off with fire. Ship, body, grave gifts, all set alight and pushed onto the water. Flames climb against a darkening sky while the clan lines the shore. Death here isn't an end, it's the road out. And that fearlessness gets weaponized in battle. The berserkers, warriors who flew into an animal rage, chewed the rim of their shield and felt no pain. Probably no courage pill, just a battle trance of roaring, rhythm, and raw fear. Mushrooms, beer, adrenaline? Historians still argue. One thing's certain, you would not want to face one with just an axe. But before you buy the heroic myth, meet the real thing. The horned helmet. Vikings never wore one. It's a 19th century invention, a costume from an opera. The real one is a plain iron cap with a nose guard, like yours. The infamous Blood Eagle? Probably just a late horror story from the sagas. The movies dressed this whole era up in fancy dress. And with no king and no police, you'd expect chaos. But order came from the Thing, an assembly of free men that passed laws, judged disputes, settled feuds. Got a problem with your neighbor over a cow? Take it to the Thing.
Call it democracy, with an axe on every belt. But strip away the combs and the laws, and this is still a brutal age. Slave women were kept as concubines. Ibn Fadlan wrote it plainly. At a great chief's funeral, a slave girl was killed and burned with the ship. And despite all those combs, you still had lice right between their teeth. Don't romanticize any of it. And that brutality wasn't a side effect, it was the business. The biggest money wasn't the plunder, it was the slave trade. Captives marched through Dublin and Hedeby and sold east. The going rate for a healthy slave? About 300 grams of silver, 6 oxen, a whole herd. A human being, priced exactly like livestock, and the whole economy ran on it. So now, the take-home. Remember the number in your pocket? $10,000 to $15,000 in silver, a rower's cut from a good raid. No payroll office, no taxman out here. Is this the era the rower keeps the whole bag? The jarl takes a third, sometimes half, for the ship. Another cut goes to the families of the dead. 40 centuries I've audited, and it almost never fails. There is always a middleman. You kept the scraps, risked your neck for them. So here's the tally. Where this farmer beats you. No rent, no boss but the weather. A wife with the keys who owns half by law. A sword worth 16 cows. Where you win. No horns, no jarl taxing your pay. Nobody billing you for your own boots. 10 to 15,000 a raid, minus a third to the middleman, minus your neck. Better than your paycheck or worse? Do the math. Comments are open. And subscribe, the one line in this ledger with no deductions. Another century, another payslip, another middleman. The ledger never runs dry.